I am interested in how to better install a mod. So that is the topic of today. The topic of today is figuring out how to install mods well. And I know that there's Mod Organizer 2 for that, I'm aware. I don't just live in my own universe. I mean, I kind of do. But yeah, we're going to be looking at some ways to install mods. A different way, maybe. A different way. We're going to be thinking about Vortex real fast. We're going to be thinking about what Mod Organizer 2 does. The way that there are certain installers, certain archives, various things like that. And I'm going to be proposing another way, Cortex. I've never used it. Cortex, Nexus Mod Manager. I've never used Cortex. I have used Nexus Mod Manager a long time ago. Those are ways of doing it, but I kind of want to propose a new method that I've been working on in the last few days, and maybe you'll watch a video about that real soon, because I have been working on a content piece for that. Anyway, so let me talk about kind of where this started. So, as you know, I've been updating BMS to just recently, just getting things in order, removing cutting room floor, all that sort of good stuff. If I'm not mistaken, Cortex has a built-in faux mod creator. Interesting to know. I did not know that. I've never used Cortex, so it might be great. I don't know. We should download it today and try it. But I'm not really interested in faux mod creation per se. I'm more interested in diving in a little deeper and looking at some kind of specifics, some overarching ideas of what an installation should look like. Anyway, what was I saying? I lose track of myself pretty easily. Anyway, yeah, I've as you know, I've been updating BMS, and after maintaining the mod list for like 2 years, there's a few things that you kind of want to get out of the process. The first thing that you want is to have a functional mod list, right? You don't want any bugs, you don't want any issues. And that's fine. If you go through and install stuff the first time, you can install mods. You can take great care to make sure that there are no conflicts or overwrites. And if there are, do your best to make sure that the correct thing wins out the conflict. Or merge, if that's the case. And doing that through the first time is okay. But if you're making a Wabbajack mod list, what you're really interested in as well is keeping the download size down. One of my main things is that I don't want people doing is spending forever downloading BMS. I want it to be pretty quick. Right now, some people are spending upwards of 24 hours, 48 hours installing BMS, and that is a problem. So, my solution to that naturally is to just remove the archives that I don't need from my downloads. So when I compile the mod list, I just remove the archives that aren't being used, and everything's good. Except it's kind of not, because I have to spend like 3 or 4 hours going through my archives, because I'm not diligent about that crap. Let's be real. I'm not diligent when I'm installing mods one at a time to make sure that I remove the old archives from my downloads folder. So eventually there ends up being duplicates, all that good stuff. And anyway, issues happen. So that's one of the problems, is I want to make sure that BMS is easy to download and it's not a big pain in the ass. What's the other thing that I want to do? I want to be able to update my damn mods. I want to be able to update them and keep things working. Unfortunately, when you're deleting old files from a mod, let's say you have... I need to get a flowchart for this. Let me get a flowchart. Let me show you guys what I'm talking about. Let me pop an old one out that I had. Anyway, there's some pretty high concept stuff on here, but we'll zoom in to a new place. Let me switch the screen so you guys can all see. And the music's going to kick in for you guys, so hopefully that'll be good. Yeah, there it is. Nice. Okay, so here we have a nice little canvas for us to work on. Let's say that you have a mod, right? And this is after it's been installed and it's out of the archive. You have a mod. And in this mod, there might be, file X file Y, and file Z. Then, hello, please align. Thank you. You might have a second mod that has, we're going to rename these real fast. We're going to rename them to A, just to keep things simple in my head, B, and C. So file A, file B, file C in mod 1. Then you might have a second mod, and it might be mod 2. And mod 2 might have file B, file C, and a new file, file D. So let me just move those over so you can kind of see. There we go. I don't like that layout. We're going to change it. Sorry, I know I'm all over the place here. I understand, but this should hopefully make it easier to understand. All right, and we have file B, file C, file D. Now, obviously, in a situation like this, you can right-click and delete and uninstall mods in the Mod Organizer 2 Downloads tab. Yes, you can absolutely do that. Sometimes, however, mod authors rename their downloads for some weird reason. I don't understand why. So when you search a mod by the archive, you won't always come up with, you know, old versions of the mod if a mod author renamed them, which kind of occurs. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of handy to do that, but it's still a manual process, right? And it takes a linear amount of time. If the more mods you install, the more time it takes for you to clean that up, right? So anyway, in a situation like this, file B is obviously, let me pop open this little window here. It's obviously being overwritten. Assuming that this is load order and that you have, where's the handy dandy arrow? Come on. Assuming that this is load order, right? Load order. You guys see this okay? Do I need to zoom it in? No, it will delete all the uninstalled. Oh, that's also a problem. I see what you're talking about. You're talking about right-click and uninstall all basically inactive mods. Problem with that is that Mod Organizer 2 doesn't really keep track of them well, and sometimes there's a mistake. Sometimes something will not be uninstalled, or if you do what I do and you duplicate your instances, like you go back to, because what I'll do is sometimes my BMS, basically my dev project folder, it will get cluttered, and what I'll do is I'll go back and reinstall it via Wabbajack so that it's all clean just like it was on the last version, without the extra stuff that I put in. And if you do that, and sometimes for other reasons too, it will not keep track of which mods are installed and which mods are uninstalled, and it will confuse them, and you could end up deleting stuff that isn't installed, or that is installed. You could end up deleting stuff that is installed, and you can end up not deleting stuff that is uninstalled, and vice versa. Anyway, back to this little thingy majigger. Okay, you have mod 2. Mod 2 has files B and C, and why not? We'll make a mod 3. Might zoom in a little bit so you guys can see better. And this one might have file A. Well, copy please. File B, and we'll give it file D. It would help if I made everything consistent, right? So in this case, what happens? This file gets overwritten. This file gets overwritten. Oh wait, well it overwrites. I mean, excuse me. This file still stays the victorious one, whatever it's the one present in game, basically. That one gets overwritten. Okay, so this is all fine and dandy, right? And obviously in Mod Organizer 2, this is alleviated somewhat by the fact that I can go through and I can manually define conflicts. I can say reposition this mod over here, and the conflicts would change. Hello, phone. Stop, phone. The conflicts would change. The overwrites would be different, and I could sort of modify things that way. What I do for BMS, because, having multiple files is not ideal, what I do is I go through and I delete everything. Now, obviously, there's some problems associated with that. I decided a long time ago that the problems were worth it because of the fact that BMS has so many texture mods in it that I don't want people to download half a terabyte of data just to play BMS. Right? That's impractical. That's more than Call of Duty. Call of Duty Warzone has. So that's not an option, right? So I delete things that aren't used. So in this case, I would get rid of these, get rid of these. Oh, that thing also gets overwritten. We forgot about that. Blah, blah, blah. I get rid of those. And I get rid of these. These are files we're talking about. We're not talking about plugin records here. Those we might have a discussion about in just a minute. So this is what ends up happening. This mod doesn't have any overwrites, so we're just going to leave it white. This file, so it's good. So this is what this is what ends up happening in BMS, right? And then I run into this little problem. Let's say mod 2, the author of mod 2 decides to update. Actually, this isn't going to work. I need to have it a little bit different. Let's say file D is from mod 1. Okay? Yeah, let's say that. Okay. Let's say the author of mod 2 decides to update to version 2 of his mod. So this is now mod 2 version 2. Obviously what I want is, let's see if I can remember what the file structure of this was. We had file B and D, I believe. Or something. I don't know. It doesn't have to be an accurate representation at all. Just mainly to make my point. All right, I have version 2 of mod 2, and I want to get rid of this thing. Let's make that. So what do I have to do in this kind of process? What I have to do is I have to go through all the files individually, and I have to compare them again. So I have to make the necessary file compares to be able to decide, hey, maybe this mod author added a new file too that wasn't in the original. Maybe he added file F, right? I can't just easily compare them, right? I can't say, well, because this mod doesn't have, because my version of this mod that's installed doesn't have X file, I can't say that file shouldn't be present in version 2, because what if he added a new file like file F? I can't just delete it that way. I actually have to see what was in the original. And so this ends up taking a bunch of my time. It ends up being a complete total pain in the butt. And it gets even more complicated if you factor in plugins. Plugins are kind of a pain to work with because they're a little different than files. And the fact that, I don't know how to explain this well, so let me just take you to my flowchart. Maybe that'll help. I spent the last few days making this, but ideally, this is what a perfect mod installation would look like, I think, unless I have made any mistakes. This is what the perfect mod installation for BMS would look like. And again, we're taking into account that I do not want file overwrites. I want to get rid of those to save on space on the end user's hard drive. And I want to be able to update mods and their plugins and their files to new versions as they come out quite easily without having to manually compare an arbitrary amount of mods. Let's say, or arbitrary amount of files. Let's say there's, 500 files in a mod. Let's say this is a huge mod, like a huge texture mod. I don't want to go through and compare 500 files each time. That's a big old pain in the butt. So ideally in this kind of scenario, this is what a mod installation would look like. what you would have is you downloaded the mod into Mod Organizer 2, right? You install it. Then you got to be able to differentiate this mod from the last version of it. So ideally you'd want to suffix the name of the mod. If you were a human doing this and you weren't a computer, you could just look at the version number, in Mod Organizer 2 in the GUI. But for simplicity's sake, let's say that you don't have access to that information and you're a dumb computer and you just want to be able to easily read off the file name. So you would suffix the mod's version number. You could also add some other information, like maybe the Nexus ID, maybe the Nexus file ID as well. You would do all those things. Then comes the first kind of challenging part that throws a whole wrench into this whole, not that it was an easy process to begin with, but it's the first wrench that we've run into here. Does the mod have a faux mod or a Bane installer or whatever, NCC if you're on Oblivion or whatever? Not that we are right now, so I don't really care. So in my case, really the two big ones are faux mod or Bane, and they are different. The formatting on those is a little different. They're both markup, I believe. But they're different. So does it have a faux mod installer? If it does have a faux mod installer, well, this is another little thing that you have to consider. Have you installed an old version of this mod previously? If you have, cool. Excuse me. You can populate the faux mod components as closely as possible to the most recent installed version's faux mod selections based on a faux mod selection master list. So if you were a human being, in order to perfectly update a mod, you would have to remember what you selected in a faux mod if it had one. Obviously, when I started BMS, when I started BMS, I didn't really think about this. So I didn't even worry about it. I mean, at one point I did kind of write it down because I was thinking like, yeah, if I would do this, for 2 years, blah, 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 I might need to know this. Except there's a problem. Mod authors change their faux mods all the freaking time. They add new fields, they add new options. Just take a look at, the one that comes to mind is Realistic Water 2. Not Realistic Water 2. Water for ENB. That mod's faux mod, or Bane installer, whatever it is, I think it's faux mod, changes basically every version, every couple of versions. The mod author decides he's going to do something new. He adds a new component to the faux mod and removes an old, outdated piece that he doesn't want people using, right? So you got to somehow consider that. I haven't written that in, obviously, and I don't know how you would even begin to account for that if you were writing a script to say automatically install mods for you, which, spoiler alert, is kind of what I'm thinking of right now. Let me go back to the Twitch comments. Actually, no, let me finish this. If there have been no older versions, then obviously it doesn't matter too much and you can select whichever versions you want, but you would want to record those for the future. If it didn't have a faux mod, you're okay. I wish all mods didn't have a faux mod. Technically, they don't have to. You could avoid this process altogether. If you wanted, you could do some weird data analytics stuff, and you could just compare the files in each, and you could actually do manual compares on each file, but then that kind of, is a whole ordeal in and of itself. So it's probably better to just stick with the faux mod, I'm thinking. Okay, so now that we're kind of at a break point, let me read chat. How do you know which plugin is necessary or not necessary in my mod load list? Oh, how do I know which plugin is necessary and not necessary in my mod load list? What do you mean, Crazy Wolf? Also, welcome to the chat, buddy. Good to hear from you. Are you talking about like which plugins do nothing or something like that? Could you elaborate some more just so I understand? To that, Decino has replied, if a mod comes with a plugin by default, it probably isn't necessary. Oh, okay. It's a kind of a confusing question, so I apologize if I'm not understanding it correctly. All right. Then you have to worry about the plugin file. Speaking of plugin files, we come to that next. If it does have a plugin file, ideally you'd want to keep a record of version numbers again. So, because in a plugin file, mod authors can change records and forums and add new ones. It's kind of like similar to what we were talking about here. The rules are slightly different, but this is an okay way to understand how a plugin file works. It's okay. It's not perfect. Obviously, you shouldn't, ideally, if you're managing a mod list, you shouldn't really delete individual records that you're not using from a plugin file. That doesn't really do too much because the file size is there, or the size impact on the plugin file is relatively small, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. And then there's some weird things too, like you can't really delete a record by adding a new record type of thing. So the rules are a little different, but in a general gist, this kind of structure is the same way that a plugin is structured. Again, not perfectly, but in a general sense. So you'd want to keep a record of all the different versions of the plugins, because mod authors can change records from their own mods, they can remove records, they can remove forms, they can add forms, they can reference other forms, they can change the references of existing forms to point to new ones. Oh, it's such a mess. Then, is the plugin replacing an older version? You probably want to evaluate that next. If it does, you have to proceed to updating the plugin and its dependee plugins. So, again, you'd want to hop into Xedit. You'd want to... There might be a method, a way of automating this. There's probably some complicated algorithm that you could feasibly come up with that could do this process for you, that could update a plugin. But I think it would still probably require some manual input. Because what if a mod author adds a feature to their plugin that is, completely outside the scope of what the plugin was doing before? It's arbitrary, which makes this whole thing kind of a pain in the ass. There's obviously like a myriad of steps to this one little, box that I wrote. There's a myriad of steps to updating a plugin in your load order and its dependee plugins. So in this case, dependee plugins would be patches. Welcome, Shuts788. Welcome to the stream, buddy. Thank you for the follow. Obviously, there's a whole myriad of processes to this. But you also have to take into account the plugins that overwrite records from this plugin. So if you have a patch plugin that does stuff to that, main plugin, and it's the dependee plugin of that plugin, you have to factor that into account. What if there are records removed from a new version of a plugin, but you still have those records taken into account on your patch plugin? Obviously, you have to go through and look at all those again. So that's kind of why I put this in the red, because it's a really complicated topic and a really hard thing to do, and it probably requires, a mod author's input. Anyway, if we do this, we'll skip to this part down in a minute, but anyway, if it doesn't replace an older version, then you're probably good. You position the plugin optimally in your load order for desired record overwrites. And then you patch the remaining undesired record overwrites via abpatch.esp method, right? So this is one of the places that I regretfully have messed up on BMS. I have done the stupid thing and made a single patch file for each module. I'm going to say it right now. I messed up. Ideally, you should only ever patch two plugins with another plugin file. Oh, hey, Shuts. You're Jay. Welcome. Tuning in while on my way home. Welcome to the stream, Jay. Anyway, I did the dumb thing here. And I made a single patch plugin for like 50 different plugins or whatever it was for each module. But ideally you want an ABC system. So mod A is the first mod B is the second mod, and mod C, the plugin there, is your patch. So that is what you want to do. Unfortunately, when I started making BMS 2 years ago, that's what I was doing, and it was a mistake. It was an oversight on my part. Once you're done with this, however, or you have updated the plugin successfully, this is when you can start getting into asset overwrites. Okay? What you want to do now to make sure that there are no duplicate files, you want to build an active NIF master list, an active PEX master list, an active SWIF master list, and an active wave master list. Now, there are other file types, of course, in mods. There are so many that you can have. There's an arbitrary amount. Mod authors can implement whatever with SKSE, whatever process they want, but these are kind of the big ones. There might be maybe Foos with the advent of, XVA synth, but in this, I just wrote down these four for no particular reason, besides the fact that they are probably the biggest and most altered files in the ecosystem of Bethesda games modding. So anyway, what you do is you build a master list for these. NIFs are 3D models. PECs are the compiled, I believe. Yes, compiled. PSC is the source scripts. You would want to create a master list of source scripts as well, or create just one for both, because, a source script needs its compiled script and whatever. They're kind of codependent on another. SWIF, which are the interfaces, and Wave is the audio, sound effects, whatever. Everything that isn't a voice that's sound related. So what do these master lists do, and what is their purpose? Well, to avoid duplicate files and to avoid adding extra files, because what often happens is what mod authors do, let's use the NIFs for example, because this is probably where it happens most. Let's say you have a mod author that decides, you know what, I want to retexture what are we going to say as an example? Let's say there's a mod author that decides, I want to retexture a tent. So what does he do? He looks up the 3D model, the NIF of the tent, and is like, you know what? I don't like the texture here. I don't like the texture on this little wooden pole. And you know what? I'm going to change the texture on the fur. So if you don't know how texture mapping works, what you basically have is, let me pull up an example. Probably would help. Just an arbitrary example. We might actually find this tent in my data folder. So that would kind of illustrate the point. Tent, textures, architecture, tents. Here we go. Large Nord tent. Let's open that up. I really got to start remembering to use the bathroom before I stream. Maybe that's TMI. Anyway. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is a terrible texture. But it'll do for now. It'll do. It's really dark, so I apologize for this. Anyway, this is the texture in this example for the large Nord fur tents, right? So what some textures have is just one texture on a square canvas, basically. But more complicated textures, what they'll have is they'll have more than one texture per file. So you might have an area of the texture that's, dedicated. In this example, you might have maybe a different asset creator would have, mapped part of this file to the fur texture, mapped another part of this file to, say, the wooden poles, the wooden stakes that are holding up the tent. So there would be a wood texture over here for that. Just depends on how it's laid out on the canvas, basically. So anyway, if that happens, a mod author might go in, he might look at this NIF file over here and think, you know what? I don't like the way that this wooden stake is mapped on the same texture as this fur. So he might separate the properties of the NIF to point to different files. And he might create another texture that, say, is specific to that wooden pole. And another one, or he might keep the original, or he might actually create a new one altogether that maps to the fur. Maybe the author goes in later and decides, you know what? I do not like the 3D model of this tent. I'm going to create my own. And then in that case, what he'll probably do is he'll, go into Blender, he'll make the 3D model. Then he'll, map the various parts to various texture files. And then you might have 3, 4, 5 arbitrary amount of new texture files that are mapped to a whole new NIF file. Maybe he'll keep the name of that NIF file the same, you know, for simplicity's sake, or maybe he won't. Maybe he decides, you know what? I don't want that NIF file to be called Nord Furtant Large 01 anymore. Maybe he decides, you know what? I want to make a plugin file and remap in the plugin the destination of that 3D model. And he might go in and do that. In that case, you end up with an arbitrary file structure that deviates from the vanilla file tree, and you could end up with an arbitrary amount of differently named files, different folders, etc., which is obviously a nightmare to manage. It's no wonder that mod lists on Wabbajack, Nexus Next are filled with crashes and other issues. It's no wonder that happens, because when you're dealing with an arbitrary system like this, a human just cannot do it perfectly. Let's see. Question. Crazy Wolf has a question. I have a blowing in the wind mod that is ask of a plugin from Lanterns of Skyrim SE, and it's causing problems with my Lanterns of Skyrim 2 mod. Okay. More details, dude. Sorry, I can't help if there's not more details. If you want, you can hop into the live stream chat room here on Discord. And, oh god, I realize I'm still muted. I'm still muted in the Discord, guys. I'm sorry. This is why I need a global mute button. Anyway, if you guys want to join in on Discord and actually listen to me there, you can do that. So yeah, it's no wonder that people mess this up if you have an arbitrary amount of files and an arbitrary amount of pointers and an arbitrarily sized file tree. This is actually something that I've been thinking about. Game developers in the real world, they don't deal with that, because why? There is, you know, maybe a small team of guys that's making assets for their game, and they're not going to create duplicate files. You know, they're going to modify the same file and improve it and make it better. They're not going to have this arbitrarily large selection of file overwrites that they need to narrow down. So it's no wonder that nobody has really thought of this. Damn, I need to watch your stream to learn more about Skyrim modding. I thought I was getting pretty good at it. Not nearly this smart. I'm still learning stuff here, man. I'm on the same level as you. As it turns out. Anyway. I need your flowchart. Yes, it's a great little flowchart. I think I've posted it in the VIP chat of my Discord, which you should already be in, Jay. Anyway. LOS 2, I was complete. Okay, that's something else. Not related to this. Anyway. So anyway, what a machine would probably do in this case is it would probably build a master list. It would build a, you know, like a JSON file or some sort of markup file that it could parse, that it could write data to, and decide and keep track of things like, hey, this file was removed because it was conflicting with another file. Because again, we're going at this, I'm going to reiterate it because somebody's probably, you know, just tuned in or something. Again, we're coming at this from the perspective that we don't want duplicate files in our mod organizer 2 installation. That's the whole premise behind this. If you can get away with duplicate files and you're not making a Wabbajack mod list, cool. But if you are, this is something you should probably consider. Yeah, you would want to build a master list of those so you could keep track of files that were, hey, inactive, that you deleted, and things of that nature. So that way, when you come to, you know, updating the plugin, you could update these master lists, because ideally you would want to parse or look through the plugin and look at all the NIF pointers, for example, and compile a master list of all the actual used NIFs. So that way you don't end up with a situation where you have, you know, some NIFs in your file folder that aren't being used. Oh, excuse me, this is going to sound gross. All right, sorry about that. That Rona's killing me. Anyway. You'll notice that one of the files that I have not listed in this master list section was the DDS texture files, because those are dependent on the NIFs you're using. A NIF can point to an arbitrary amount. Stop. I don't know what my watch is doing. I just got a smartwatch. and I have no idea how to use it, but it tells me things that I didn't even know I wanted to know at times. I think it might actually tell me the amount of times I've taken a shit today. I don't even keep track of that. All right, let me get the head tracking back on. There we go. Okay. Because NIF files store the actual textures that they use, those aren't stored in the plugin. What you need to know is you need to know the NIFs that you're using first before you compile a master list of DDS plugins. But anyway, after you have these, you should probably go through and sort the conflicts. At this point, you can do just the general concept of checking file conflicts. So I'll briefly step through that, but this is mostly self-explanatory at this point. If you're basically any kind of mod author, if you've done modding on on the Nexus Mod Manager a long time ago, if you're modding on Vortex, these are things you should consider in doing right at the installation time. If you're using Mod Organizer 2, then obviously you can wait until later. And unfortunately, the flaw of Mod Organizer 2 is that you don't actually get around to comparing the files because you don't need to, right? When you notice an issue in game, that's when you compare them. You don't compare them at installation time. At least most people don't. If you're great at building a mod list and and you have the oomph to do this, then bravo, because I forget this all the time. All right, so quickly stepping through this, do you have any non-DDS, those are the textures, asset file conflicts with existing active mod files? If you do, you should binary compare the conflicting files, basically to make sure that it is not a duplicate of a vanilla file or an existing file that some installed later down the road in your mod list, but before you were installing this mod. Anyway, you should binary compare them. So are the files the same? If they are not the same, you need to manually review the file. I think. Did I mess this up? Did I mess up the flowchart? If they are not the same, what this tells us is that there are changes being made in the file that are in addition to the ones that were either in vanilla or in addition to the ones that were in your load order before. So you want to see what those changes are. You need to manually review the file. Again, if you're a computer, you should parse the binary data somehow and figure that out. That's a very, very complicated discussion for somebody much, much smarter than I am. But if you're a person, what you would do is you would, compare NIF files, the meshes in an application like NIFscope, where you can, pull the drop-down menus down and see all the blocks of, data for the 3D model and compare things like material properties, compare things like, coordinates, compare vertex alphas, etc., etc., etc. Because NIFs are so complicated, NIFs in particular, this could take a long time on. If you're comparing if you're comparing the scripts, you wouldn't take the PEX file because that's compiled, but you would take the PSC file if you had it. Some mod authors don't actually package that. And you would compare it in an application like VS Code or maybe Notepad++ or whatever. Again, scripts can be of arbitrary length, so this process for a single script could be pretty easy if it's a few lines of code, or it can be pretty complicated if there's a lot. For interface files, which are a beast in their own right, you should probably look at something like the Free Flash decompiler, or if you, are prone to using the dark web, use Adobe Flash CS6 to compare it. And Flash files are their own thing. It's a compiled format as well, just like PEX, but it's a little different in the fact that there are assets in the file, like textures and sounds and stuff like that, as well as code, as well as Flash code or whatever the code was for Swift files. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Wave files are obviously waveforms. So yeah, I mean, even if you were somehow gonna merge wave files, you probably need to be an audio engineer of some kind. Figure out a good way of doing this. I'm not an audio engineer. I've never delved into it. I don't think anybody in their right mind in the Skyrim modding community would probably at this time merge WAV files. Maybe the guy of audio overhaul for Skyrim would do that. And then for DDS files, we'll get to that later. But anyway, first you want to compare the other ones except for the DDS, because you want to make sure that all your NIF conflicts are reviewed before you build the NIF master list. So you would hold off on doing this right for now. Anyway, you would compare those in their respectable applications. The free version of Audition Edition is Adobe. You could maybe use something like Audacity, for example. Anyway, after you compare them, you need to evaluate a few things. First, are the changes provided by the new file noticeable in-game when compared to the existing file, or could they become noticeable with future changes? If the answer to that question is yes, does the new file fix any issues with the existing file? If the answer to that question is no, does the new file provide any additional benefits over the existing file? Like, are there new features that, you know, somebody might say want in their mod list for flavor or style points or whatever you're doing? And are these benefits desired by you? If the answer to the question of fixing issues with an existing file is yes, like let's say maybe, I don't know, we're not doing textures yet, but let's take textures for example. Maybe a texture was, maybe there was like a seam in it somewhere and somebody fixed it, for example. Or maybe a NIF file was had its UV mapping fixed. If it does provide fixes, then you want to skip to this part. And does the new file contain any regressive changes from the existing file? This is the million-dollar question right here. Let's say you have two files that both provide different features, and obviously they're a fork of the vanilla files, because that's what most mod authors do. They fork the vanilla files, they make their own copies of them, and then add their changes. If there are two files with their own individual benefits, you need to merge those files if you want both of those benefits. If you're somebody who's like, hey, you know what? I don't actually want these benefits anymore, then fine. Just replace one of the files. But if you come to this merging step and you decide that, hey, I want benefits of both files, you need to merge them in a way. And this is obviously dependent on which type of file you're working with. If you're working with a NIF, you have to work in NIF scope if you're a human being at least. And you have to patch those together to make sure that they're working. If you're coding, you need to obviously do it in a text editor. And if we're using the free Flash decompiler, you need to work with the code and work with the assets and all the stuff in there. Or if you're working with Adobe CS6. Obviously engineer for those and blah, blah, blah textures. Anyway. So yes, if your answer to all of these questions, except are the files the same, no, then you keep the existing file, because ideally, you don't want to add files from new mods willy-nilly if they're the same and have, you know, ideally you want to stay as close to the vanilla files as possible. Anyway, once you're done deciding on which of these three to do via the above steps, you need to do that for all the rest of the conflicting non-DDS files. If you're done with that step, however, you can build the active DDS master list from the active NIF master list. So this tells us the active DDS files in our load order. And from that case, you can then check for conflicting DDS files via the active NIF master list, or the active DDS master list, excuse me. And if there are conflicts, then you have to go back through this and do it for textures, etc. And we're finally at the end. That is the perfect mod installation right there. Perfect mod installation contingent on the fact that you do not want overwrites, file overwrites. If you're just doing it for yourself, if you're building your own mod lists and you're okay with, you know, keeping old versions of files, then this probably doesn't apply to you. It does if you still want the best looking file, because again, in a mod with an arbitrary amount of files, you still want to be able to see and you still want to be able to see the best asset in each case. You still want to compare them because you don't want to you know, like take 10 files from a mod, maybe 3 of them are better, but 5 of them regress from the version you had installed before. You don't want to do that. So if you're looking to get the best assets in your game, the perfect, flawless assets in your game, you need to follow this process. Or if you are looking to have a mod list in Mod Organizer 2 with 0 duplicate files to slim down the size of your mod list for Wabbajack, etc., then you absolutely should follow this. I don't know why. I don't think anyone has made a map of this before. I spent the last maybe day thinking about it and coming up with this. But yeah, this is the ideal mod installation. It's no wonder then that people in the modding community fuck up their mod lists willy-nilly left and right every single day of the week. Because nobody can keep track of this. The only person that can keep track of a flowchart this complicated, and again, it doesn't have everything because I'm not actually going through the merging steps. There's a lot of steps to merging files. I'm not going through the process of updating plugins, for example. Those are all, you know, they should have flowcharts in their own right. So it's no wonder then that there are constantly mod lists that have issues that go unresolved. Crashes, you know, being the most extreme example, but just small inconsistencies, textures inconsistencies, whatever. Because only a freaking robot can keep track of a file tree that's bigger than this. I had to think about it before I wrote all this down. There's a lot to it. So this is why, going full circle to why we started this discussion, there needs to be a better installation manager for Mod Organizer 2. It needs to happen. This right here is not gonna cut it. This willy-nilly, do you want to install this archive, is not gonna cut it. That's why just a regular foam mod will not cut it, even if I click manual here. This is not gonna cut it because it does not provide me with an interface to compare 3D models, for example. In fact, there's no way of comparing things like 3D models, which are the most overwritten asset in Bethesda games when it comes to modding. One of the cool things that Mod Organizer 2 has implemented over the last quite a while. Let me scroll down to wherever I stopped updating recently. It's provided me with a way to actually view texture files. I believe this is like a 2-year-old improvement now, or maybe more. I can open up textures in an actual MO2 window and I can look at the textures. But this can be taken one step further. They already have the rendering API in place via, I believe that's using Python in the back end. And I believe it's using QTPy 5 for its window display. And I believe it's using OpenGL for the rendering of this DDS file. But it needs to have two of them side by side so that you can actually compare and see the changes. It needs to make a heat map, for example, just for textures of things that are different between textures. Because one of the most notorious things that mod authors do is they, you know, color grade an existing texture to be a little darker, for example. Maybe it changes the darkness level of pixels across the board to be 5% darker than the texture was before for their specific ENB. That's something that people installing mods should know about, at least those that care. If you're just installing mods for fun and you don't care about getting the best result, then fine, ignore all this. But this needs to happen. And currently, if I open up, say, what's a mod with a 3D model? Rally's fishing poles. Nope, that's textures. Dragon claws, JS dragon claws. If I attempt to open up this NIF file right here, I mean, yes, you can do it like this, but it's not in MO2. And If I want to open it up with actual textures, I have to right click it and I have to open it in the VFS, which takes time. There's not really a way of avoiding that. But then once you have this, let's say you open up 2 textures, and then you open them both up with the virtual file system so that you get the textures. Oh, come on, next. Obviously, this isn't a one-for-one comparison, but what you need is an actual window where you see the changes from the blocks. You need a way to compare these, because going through one by one as a human being is impossible unless you're a Taiwanese sweatshop worker, which I am not, right? So this needs to happen at some point if we are actually going to get to making really damn good mod lists. Because the amount of time it takes to actually compare this shit by yourself with the, you know, the thousands of clicks that you have to make to just compare 2 mods, it's impractical. I'm a human being. My time is limited. Everybody's time is. And so this is just impractical. Again, it's a lot easier for me to say this and say that it needs happening. The MO2 developers already know that there needs to be some sort of render window for 3D NIFs. But most people don't consider this, which is why I'm, you know, trying to hopefully bring it to somebody's attention. All right. Let's see. Are there any questions in chat? Any questions regarding what I said? Thoughts? Comments doesn't even have to be a question. I have been ignoring you, chat, and I apologize. So, let me quickly read through. Some things regarding Lanterns of Skyrim 2. Can we talk? Yes. Crazy Wolf, I'm not ignoring you. I see that you want to talk. Just give me 1 minute. Let me read through the chat and then use the bathroom, and then I'll get to helping you out, okay? It doesn't have a transparency as alpha layer. It doesn't, which is annoying. Photoshop has that feature. So most landscape textures are 95% invisible in it. Yes, that is very true about the DDS, the texture viewer in Mod Organizer 2. It's not perfect. Isn't that what the pick a background color button is for? No. No, it's not. It's just the background color. That's personal preference. It's whatever you want to see in the background. It doesn't, so let me see if I can find a landscape texture that I can show you this on. Textures. ABCD landscape. Oh, what's one? Okay, actually this one has it, Decino. Isn't this the alpha, if I'm not mistaken? The alpha layer? Anyway, so this particular texture is Fall Forest Grass 01. That's what it looks like in the preview window of Mod Organizer 2. I'll open that up again in just a second. If I open it with Photoshop, I have this option right here. It says load alpha as channel instead of transparency. And if I hit OK, I get this preview of the same file where I actually don't have the clear parts below. This is in contrast. This is in contrast to the MO2 preview, which has the alpha. Same file, look way different. It does, but you can't see almost anything because of it. Okay, yeah, that's what I think I just explained, hopefully. So yeah. Again, in the game, the alpha is going to be there, right? If I'm not mistaken, though, so it It's kind of a good representation, but it's also kind of not at the same time. It'd be nice to have that option if you wanted to see the full texture without the alpha layer.